I thought I was too old for love until he changed everything. For so many years, I convinced myself that romance was something meant only for the younger ones, for those who still had time to dream about forever. My name is Margaret Taylor, though everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 58 years old, and for decades, I believed love had passed me by. Life had been a mixture of quiet victories and heavy disappointments. I had 2 children, both grown and married, who were busy with their own families. My husband, Daniel, had passed away nearly 15 years ago. After he was gone, I poured myself into raising my children, into working, into keeping a home standing. But as the years slipped by, I began to feel like I was fading into the background of my own life. Somewhere along the way, I decided love was no longer for me. I lived in a small town in Oregon, where life moved slowly, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and routines. People often told me I looked younger than my age, but inside, I felt much older. The loneliness was something I carried quietly. I never said much about it to anyone, not even to my daughter Emily or my son Michael. They thought I was perfectly fine living alone, keeping myself busy with gardening, volunteering at the local library, and hosting book club meetings. What they didn't know was how often I went to bed feeling the weight of silence pressing down on me. How sometimes I wished there was someone beside me to simply talk to about my day. The turning point came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day you don't expect to be life-changing. I had gone to the library, not as a volunteer that day, but just to pick up a novel I had reserved. As I was walking through the aisles, I bumped into someone. Quite literally. Books slipped from my hands and scattered across the carpet. When I looked up, I saw a man kneeling to help me gather them. He had a kind smile, streaks of gray in his dark hair, and the kind of gentle eyes that seemed to see more than what was in front of them. He handed me the books and chuckled softly. "I'm sorry about that. Guess I wasn't watching where I was going." I remember smiling back politely, thinking it was just a fleeting encounter, but there was something about the way he lingered for a moment, almost as though he wanted to say more. His name, I later learned, was Thomas Bennett. Everyone called him Tom. He had recently moved to town, buying a small house near the river after retiring from his job as an architect in Portland. He was 61, just a few years older than me, and unlike many men I had known in my life, he had an air of calmness about him, as if nothing in the world could rush him. Over the next few weeks, I began to see him more often at the library. Sometimes he was reading quietly in a corner. Other times he was checking out thick books about history or architecture. Eventually, we began exchanging polite greetings, and then conversations. He told me about his late wife, Susan, who had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness. His honesty struck me. He didn't hide his grief, but he also didn't let it define him completely. He had come to our little town because he wanted peace, a slower life, and maybe even a new beginning. One afternoon, he asked if I'd like to join him for coffee at the cafe across the street. I hesitated at first. It had been so long since anyone had asked me out, even casually, that I didn't know how to react. But something inside me said yes, and so I did. That simple cup of coffee turned into 2 hours of laughter, of sharing stories, of realizing how much we had in common. We both loved books, gardening, and long walks. He was warm and attentive, the kind of man who truly listened when you spoke, not just waiting for his turn to talk. That day sparked something in me I thought was gone forever. Over time, Tom and I began to spend more time together. He would invite me on walks by the river, or we'd visit the Saturday farmers market, picking out fresh vegetables and flowers. Sometimes, he'd come by my house to help fix something that had been sitting broken for far too long, like the creaky back door I had stopped bothering to close properly. Other times, I'd cook dinner for the 2 of us, and we'd talk late into the evening about our families, our pasts, our dreams. Even at our age, we realized we still had them. It wasn't always easy. I wrestled with doubts constantly. I worried what my children would think if they knew I was seeing someone. Would they think I was betraying their father's memory? Would they be upset that I was moving on? But one evening, when Emily came by for dinner, she noticed the extra plate in the sink and asked about it. My cheeks flushed, but I told her the truth. I had a friend, and his name was Tom. To my surprise, her face lit up with a smile. She reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "Mom, that's wonderful. You deserve someone who makes you happy." Those words lifted a burden I didn't realize I had been carrying. Not long after, Michael expressed the same support when he visited with his kids. My grandchildren adored Tom from the start. He had a way with children, patient and playful, telling them funny stories, or showing them how to build little towers out of blocks. Seasons changed, and so did my heart. The woman who once believed she was too old for love was now laughing more, smiling more, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in years. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic romance. It was about the quiet companionship, the little moments of kindness, the steady presence of someone who truly cared. There were challenges, of course. Tom and I had both lived long lives before meeting each other. We had our routines, our habits, our scars. Sometimes we disagreed about small things, like how to spend our weekends or what movie to watch. But instead of letting those differences pull us apart, we learned to compromise, to listen, to respect one another's ways. We knew that at our age, love wasn't about changing the other person. It was about accepting them fully, imperfections and all. One crisp autumn evening, as we sat on my porch wrapped in blankets, watching the leaves fall from the trees, Tom took my hand in his and said softly, "Maggie, I know we didn't meet when we were young, but I think that's okay. Because meeting you now feels like the right time." His words brought tears to my eyes, not of sadness but of gratitude. I realized then that love doesn't have an expiration date. It comes when it's meant to, and sometimes that timing is later in life. Months turned into years, and our bond only deepened. Together, we created a new chapter of life that neither of us had expected. We traveled a little, nothing extravagant, road trips along the coast, visits to small towns, afternoons spent exploring gardens and museums. We celebrated birthdays together, holidays, and simple Tuesday evenings with a pot of soup and fresh bread. Every moment felt like a gift, a reminder that life still had so much beauty to offer. Looking back now, I see how wrong I was to believe love was only for the young. Love doesn't fade with age. If anything, it grows richer, fuller, more meaningful. When you've lived long enough, you understand the value of patience, of forgiveness, of cherishing the little things. You realize that love is not about grand declarations, but about showing up every day, holding hands through the storms, and laughing together when the sun shines again.